Here we go. Okay, so welcome everybody. I'm so glad that you're able to join us, and we're going to talk about the Save Our Granite Stages grant program today. And so this grant program is funded by the state of New Hampshire through the American Rescue Plan. And we made a proposal to the governor's office for emergency relief and recovery, the GOFR, and worked with them to craft this grant program. And we're so excited about it. We have $1 million to distribute, which is a lot of money for our little arts council. The maximum grant in this program is $25,000. That said, depending on how many applications we receive and how many are approved, awards will be subject to a pro rata share of what's available. Come on. There we go. So who's eligible for this program? Small performing arts venues that seat 300 people or less, and production entities that produce in small venues. Venues and production entities must not have received grants from the federal Shuttered Venue Operator Grant Program. There's Kila. So that's really, really important. What we're trying to do here is fill a hole. There are organizations that either didn't apply for the federal SVOG or did apply and weren't granted funds for one reason or another. And that's the group that we're trying to help here. Organizations must be incorporated, located in the state, and in good standing with the Secretary of State. And must not be majority owned or controlled by a publicly traded corporation. And that is because we don't want those big chain or big giant organizations applying for this particular funding stream. You're going to need to have a DUNS number or a UEI. So the UEI is a new thing from the federal government. It is going to replace the need for a DUNS number. And it requires registration on the federal government's grant site called sam.gov. And on our website, we've got some information about the UEI and how to get one. And there's also a link in the guidelines, a live link in the guidelines for this program that you can click right through to find out more. Nonprofits have to have an independent board, obviously. Organizations must have at least 1 year of arts programming. However, what you will see as we get further into the guidelines is that the organizations have to have been operating in 2019, really, in order to qualify, because we're going to be comparing 2021 and 2019 to figure out the organization's losses. Obviously must be in compliance with the Americans with Disabilities Act. And if you've received grants from us in the past, you have to be in good standing with us as well. And of course, individuals and religious organizations are not eligible. So here's how we define a performing arts venue. And I think that this is really important. It's defined as a facility that is primarily engaged in presenting the arts. And for the purposes of this grant, those presentations have to be seated, ticketed, and open to the public. Performing arts production entities, again, are businesses that are primarily engaged in producing performing arts in small venues. So there are funding criteria in the guidelines, and if you've ever applied for a grant from us in the past, some of this is going to look very familiar. We will be convening a panel to review applications, and they will be using these funding criteria to rate your applications. So the first criteria is the quality of your arts programming. And this is really important because we want to see that your programming is consistent with your organization's mission and that it does demonstrate creativity and vision. You're going to have to explain how your programming contributes to artistic development and benefits the public, and how your programming is population or age appropriate and serves underserved populations. So all of those things are going to be really important. And you'll provide a URL, you'll provide other work samples to show us and show the panel what you've been doing. The next thing that the panel will look at is administrative capacity. And so this is basically so that they can assess that your organization has the administrative capacity to manage the grant, to use it appropriately, and really to report on it as well, because there will be a final report. And then we're going to be looking at the impact of the grant, of your request, on the arts workforce or the state's cultural ecosystem. And so that means you're going to need to talk about how your funding could have a significant impact on the workforce, how the funding will benefit your organization. And I think this is probably the easiest question to answer, right? Everybody's suffered losses, and so this funding will definitely help you respond to, adapt to the ongoing pandemic. So when you make the grant request, what you're going to do is you're going to apply for support in the amount of 70% of your COVID-19 related earned revenue losses from March 3rd, 2021 to December 31st, 2021. And so this is a very specific period of time. And the reason it starts on March 3rd, 2021 is that is the day that the state of New Hampshire formally accepted its ARPA support from the federal government. And we can't cover anything with this money, anything that happened before March 3rd, 2021. And so in the grant application, you're going to be comparing that period in 2021 to the same period in 2019. 2019 was pre-pandemic. And so when we get to the budget form, I'll show you how that works. But also too, whatever you're applying for in this grant can't have been covered by any other state or federal funding dispersed in 2021, okay? And that includes any state administered CARES Act or ARPA funds. And so remember, this would be any of these funds that were received in 2021. Now, I know that St. Kieran and received CARES Act funds from us, and I think Melissa's organization did as well, but that was in 2020. So you'll have to look back and what you received or didn't. If you received any county or municipality administered CARES Act or ARPA funds, any federal paycheck protection, EIDL loans, or any kind of an advance from the Labor Department or the Small Business Administration, and any other federal CARES Act or ARPA programs that you might have received funds from. So you have to look very carefully if you did receive any of these funds in 2021, what you said you were going to use them for, because what we're saying here is that you can't double dip. So you're going to be calculating in your grant request your earned revenue losses. And so this could be ticket sales, venue rentals, things like that have caused you to close or reduce capacity, etc. Any increased personnel costs. So some organizations did have personnel costs that went up in 2021 because of staffing shortages or overtime. Increased facilities costs. So let's say in your venue, you installed a new HVAC system during that period of time. Your facilities costs might be higher than they were in 2019. If you had increased health and safety costs, so a lot of organizations certainly do for that period of 2021 compared to 2019. If you were buying PPE, you're doing special cleaning, hiring people to do some of that as well could go back to your personnel costs. Oops, sorry. If you had increased marketing and promotional costs in 2021, if you were doing more marketing and more promotion because you rescheduled events or you canceled performances, or you were doing special campaigns to help your audiences return, you can claim those. So this is what the budget form looks like. And what I'm going to do right now, well, I'll do it in a little bit. I'll show you actually how it works. Has anybody watched the tutorials yet? So there's a budget tutorial, and there's also a tutorial on the online application. And so I'll get to where those things are in just a couple of minutes. So what we're looking at is your earned revenue for these specific things: ticket sales, venue rentals, personnel costs, facilities costs, health and safety, and marketing and promotion. So the first two, ticket sales and venue rentals, you would fill out the form if your 2021 revenue from those sources is less than it was in 2019. And the Excel form actually does the math for you, so it'll calculate what the loss was. And then the other four, you would fill out if your 2021 costs for those things were higher than they were in 2019. And so I'll show you the real budget form in just a minute. So of course, there are always restrictions to our grants. You can't use the grant for any cost prior to March 3rd, 2021, or any previously incurred debts or deficits. If you've applied for grants from us in the past, all of this language will be very, very familiar. You see it in almost all of the guidelines for our grant programs. Obviously, you can't use it for overlapping costs. Again, that's the double dipping part. You can't re-grant the money. You can't use it for travel. You can't fund new positions with it. I mean, this is just boilerplate language that we have to put in. You can't use it for new or special projects or programs. You can't use it for any costs related to home offices or promotion of political, religious, ideological, etc. Points of view. You can't use it for lobbying. Pretty standard. So in the grant application, there are required documents. So the last page of the guidelines is the narrative questions, and those questions, which I'll go over in a little bit, are directly related to the criteria, the funding criteria in the guidelines. And in fact, most of the language in the narrative questions is repetitive. It's based directly on the funding criteria. So the narrative questions are required, the completed budget form, financial reports. So to help compare the period in 2021 to the same period in 2019, we're going to ask you to pull profit and loss statements for those periods of time from your financial system. And so whether you use QuickBooks or something else, you want to pull P&Ls for the March 3rd to December 31st periods of time in 2021 and 2019. And you'll have the budget form too, but the panel will look at all of these things. Whoops. You'll also submit documentation of any COVID-19 related relief that you received in 2021, if you got some. And so that could be communications with the agency that you received the funds from, documentation of a final report, documentation of actual receipt of the funds, could be circling in on a bank statement. If you're a nonprofit, university, or municipal applicant, you'll include a list of your current board of directors or advisory committee. If you are a venue, you need to document your venue size. And so that could be your seating chart primarily. If you're a production entity, you need to document the venue sizes of the venues that you produce in. So you'll be uploading more than probably than just one seating chart. And so then you also want to document your losses, so as outlined on the budget form. And so what that would mean would be, it could be correspondence regarding artist or show cancellations, ticket sales documentation, proof of capital expenditures, so it could be receipts, invoices, those kinds of things. You might want to document any COVID-19 policies that contributed to reduced revenue. That could be screenshots from your website. It could be a brochure or a poster, other documentation of policies that contributed. If you conducted any audience surveys during the pandemic, this could be very interesting information for the panel. You can provide marketing and promotional materials that were created during that particular period, especially if you're going to claim losses related to increased marketing. You'll want to include that material. You also want to include documentation of your most recent season, playbills, brochures, your website, anything like that. I know some organizations were presenting in 2021 and some are presenting in 2022, which is excellent. I think just about everybody is presenting now and producing in 2022, which is terrific. And then of course, we want your tax form or your most recent annual audit. So remember that the narrative questions go back to the funding criteria. And so each one of those funding criteria have those bullets. And the quality of arts programming section is that we really want to understand your organization. Mission and goals, what makes it unique, and what your role is in bringing the arts to your community. And it's always important that you remember that panelists may not be familiar with your organization. And so you really want to tell us about your organization in that section. And of course, you know, there are those 3 bullets: how your programming is consistent with your mission, how your activities contribute to artistic development and benefit the public, and how your programs are population or age specific and serve underserved communities. In administrative capacity, we want to understand from an administrative perspective how your business or organization is organized, who the staff are, who the board are, if you have board member profiles, and how you've managed past grants if your organization has received them. And then for the impact section, we want to understand how your organization impacts the arts community, especially during the pandemic, and how the grant will benefit your organization. And so when you write this section, really puts particular emphasis on that period, March 3rd, 2021 to December 31st, 2021. So people want to know the timeline always. So May 27th is the application deadline. We will convene a review panel during the month of June. And then on July 15th, the Arts Council will act on the panel's recommendations. The week of July 17th, we hope, applicants will be notified and grant paperwork will be emailed, and that'll either happen that week or the week after. Some of this is, a little unsure. And then once the grant paperwork is returned and everything's complete, payment will be made for grants under $10,000, but grants over $10,000 must go to Governor and Council for approval. If you have received another grant from us in fiscal 23, because by the time these grants are made, it will be fiscal 23. You may end up having to go to Governor and Council even if your grant is under $10,000, because that's the threshold for organizations. So before we go to questions, what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop sharing from here, and I'm just going to go to the budget form so I can show you that. And go back to sharing my screen. So here's the budget form again. This is in Excel, and we do have a fillable PDF, but we really would like you to use the Excel form because it'll do the math for you. So, and when you watch the budget tutorial, you will see that the first thing I say is that it's really important to put your organization's name where it says applicant name, because we receive a lot of budget forms that have no identifying information on them. And so, but the form is great. It does the math, and let's say, my ticket sales were reduced in 2021 as opposed to 2019. You can see that it calculates the loss at $2,000. It automatically calculates the difference. And at the bottom of the form, it'll calculate your total loss and what that 70% grant request would be. So watch the entire budget tutorial, because at the end of the budget tutorial, I show you how to properly save this form as a PDF, because we really prefer that everything be submitted as a PDF. So let me share my browser now. This is the Save Our Granite Stages page on our website. And you'll find everything you need on this page. The grant guidelines, the budget form. There's a link to start the online application, and I'll show you that in a minute. There are also written instructions on how to fill out the online application. There's a video tutorial on how to fill out the online application. And then there is a budget tutorial here as well, and links to today's Zoom session and the next one, Thursday, April 21st. And so that's where everything is on our webpage, and you can access it right from here. The what's new, it'll take you right there. And then also, hold on just a second, got to get to it. This is the online application at submittable.com. And when you watch the tutorial, I will say this assumes that you have created a free account at Submittable and that you're logged into the system. It's a pretty simple application, really. But watch the tutorial because I do explain things, particularly this choosing an arts discipline for your primary area of your organization's work. We want all sorts of information about your organization, fiscal summary, most of the things that you would expect that we would ask you for, grant request information. And so you'll put the dollar amount of your request, and then you'll choose whatever you filled out on the budget form, you'll check here. And then you'll upload everything in the upload section. And again, we really prefer things in PDF format. There's much less chance that we could do damage to a Word document or an Excel file if everything is submitted as PDFs. So now we can go back to questions.